honeys, and welcome back. Now, first and foremost, I do want to apologize for saying that we would be more consistent and then immediately not doing that. Unfortunately, this was a little bit beyond my control, our absenteeism over the last couple of weeks. We've been having some major technical difficulties involving our equipment, specifically my laptop and GarageBand. I don't know what is going on with this thing, but it is not only convinced that it no longer has an internal camera, but also that our microphone does not exist. So thank you for your patience while we figured all that out. We are back, however, and ready to provide you with your art news breakdown, your top headlines, and the why you should care about them for March 15th through the 21st. So without any further delay or ado, here we go, and enjoy the show. Our longer-time listeners will know that I am a huge fan of wordplay, specifically alliteration, and the phrase follow-ups first, so we'll begin there today with our film by artist Alexandra Singh and art historian Natalie Mostiata having won the Oscar last week. Although it did technically tie with the musical comedy short The Singers, an 18-minute film on Sunday. Two People Exchanging Saliva, a 36-minute French film, came out as a sort of sleeper hit in this category. Singh himself is well known for his elaborate performances and narrative artworks. He used the opportunity to take a light jab at recent comments by Timothée Chalamet during his acceptance speech, saying, quote, "We believe that art can change people's souls. We can change society through art and creativity, through theater and ballet," end quote. Next, some updates for the honeys on the lawsuits in the arts against the U.S. president. The president was called the quote-unquote steward, not owner of the White House over his ballroom plans by U.S. District Judge Richard J. Leon on March 17th during the probing of the administration's justifications for tearing down the monument's East Wing last year. The judge said the administration was quote-unquote brazen in its claim during questioning that it did not need congressional approval for the 90,000 square foot project, as legally the president has the right to make alterations and to do maintenance on the building. He said, quote, "I'm struggling to see this as an alteration," end quote. As we've covered, conservationists have opposed the $400 million ballroom plan, and it seems likely that Judge Leon could rule on whether Trump must cease and or desist by the end of March. Meanwhile, a new lawsuit was filed against Trump, the Kennedy Center, and others in the administration on Monday of last week by historic preservation groups to block Kennedy Center changes that are planned. The new suit does not argue the need for routine maintenance and repairs, but rather argues that the more substantial changes that Trump has implied wanting to make should go through the typical review process that governs other major projects in the nation's capital. The why we care here, of course, is the possible effects on the center itself and that there are some familiar faces involved. Some of the lawyers representing the preservation groups have been part of separate legal cases challenging other Trump moves to alter Washington's historic core, and these pointed to a, quote, broader pattern of unauthorized damage to historic buildings in the Capitol District, end quote, including his decision last year to suddenly knock down the East Wing of the White House to make way for a ballroom. And all of this comes ahead of the 2-year closure that Trump insists is necessary to renovate the prominent performing arts venue. We also learned that DePaul Art Museum's advisory board has called upon the university to save that institution. A letter addressed to the leaders of the school, such as President Robert L. Manuel and Provost Salma Ghanem, was signed by multiple Board of Trustees members, some of whom who have served for over 10 years, in addition to artists Brendan Fernandez, Rachel L.S. Harper, and Melissa Leandro, former Expo Chicago head Tony Carnum, Sotheby's Senior Vice President Gary Metzner, and art advisor Lynn Manilow, among other significant names. And it reads in part, quote, "We, the members of the advisory board for the DePaul University Art Museum, want to share directly with you our significant anger, frustration, and deep sadness regarding your recent egregious decision to permanently close the art museum, and even more problematically, determine post hoc what is to be done with the associated art collection that has been established over many years for the university," end quote. That collection is 4,000 objects strong, and no plans, as far as we know, have been made for scheduled future gifts. The board then went on to complain of a, quote, seemingly never-ending whirlwind of both uncertainty and poor decision-making by the university administration, end quote, pointing out that plans are moving ahead for a state-of-the-art athletic facility for which the university received more than $10 million in donations, even as the museum closes. And the response from the school has been notably lackluster. DePaul University's press office sent Art News, one of our sources for today, a statement calling it a quote-unquote difficult decision to stop operations at the museum after publication of the news, but that's all the more we heard. And lastly, for this category, honeys, we want to draw your attention to the fact that Fort Lauderdale is still fighting the removal of rainbow crosswalks. The crackdown began in August of 2025 with the planned removal of roughly 100 public artworks across Florida under Governor Ron DeSantis' Safe Streets program in collaboration with the Florida Department of Transportation, but it might end in May of this year when both parties may have a final one-day hearing. The directive to erase these street-based artworks reportedly stems from an FDOT, Florida Department of Transportation, memo prohibiting painted pavement featuring, quote, social, political, or ideological messages, end quote, that was issued following guidance from U.S. Transportation regarding, quote-unquote, appropriate road signage. The why we care here, of course, is that this legal dispute over what constitutes safe streets and markings runs parallel to the escalating nationwide ideological overhaul of the arts, culture, and education as spearheaded by the Trump administration. Even more notably, Fort Lauderdale's lawsuit against this Safe Streets program is the last one standing, so to speak, and it could be the final chance to end this directive. Our sources report that approximately 9 Florida cities launched legal challenges in response to that order, but have been unsuccessful thus far. For example, on October 8th, Miami Beach voluntarily dismissed its petition challenging the directive to remove its street art. A memo written by the Fort Lauderdale interim city attorney, Dwayne Spence, and published in part by the South Florida Sun-Sentinel confirms that this is kind of it when it comes to this issue. Now, we're concerned over whether or not Fort Lauderdale wins because critics of that Safe Streets program have argued that it is really just an attempt to scrub LGBTQ plus history from public view, since the majority of artworks deemed in violation of the directive are overwhelmingly pride-themed. This is another case of potential censorship and whether or not we are going to see representation of minority groups in the public eye in public space. Some brand new arts-related legal news. Congress has adopted the HERE Act extension. Although that adoption by the House of Representatives of the bipartisan bill is largely being celebrated, there are some concerns, however, about the new amendments of the 2016 legislation, which was designed to make it easier to restitute Nazi-looted artworks and which would expire later this year. Some are worried that the new bill would make it too difficult for the current owners of potentially looted artworks to fairly defend themselves, as the extension's new wording would essentially limit the ability of museums and other holders to rely on time-based defenses. This is ostensibly a good change because it means that more cases will be decided on their merits rather than on procedural grounds. But others are concerned about the provision which gives the U.S. legal system jurisdiction in foreign cases. The new language explicitly qualifies Nazi-era seizures as violations of international law, potentially allowing more cases against foreign institutions to move forward. And foreign governments are watching that part especially closely. French entities have expressed unease about U.S. courts overriding existing frameworks, while German officials have raised similar concerns about eroding sovereign immunity despite affirming their commitment to restitution. Others, however, see these changes as a quote-unquote tremendous development, such as Nicholas O'Donnell, who represented the heirs of the disputed Gulf treasure case. So what the big deal boils down to here, honeys, is the shift in focus from the procedural to the bigger picture questions, the contested facts of whether a sale was forced, whether ownership can be clearly established, and whether enough evidence survives to make a fair decision. In any case, however, Trump still must sign it into law first. We also learned that the National Gallery of Art has acquired nearly 600 new works as of last week, spanning from the 17th century to today, and that matters because it reflects some of the museum's current priorities in terms of its holding, which under Trump influence has increased its efforts to strengthen areas like early photography and large-scale works. That may be why the list of acquisitions includes a trove of 35 Civil War photographs by the likes of Alexander Gardner, George N. Barnard, and Andrew Joseph Russell, in addition to pieces by Dan Flavin, Barbara Kruger, Claire Fontaine, and Pepin Osorio. Several of the newly added works are the first by their respective artists to enter the National Gallery's collection, and that is also worth celebrating. And as of last week, institutions, especially across California, are removing references to the Chicano labor leader, Cesar Chavez, who was accused of sexually abusing girls in a new investigation which was publicized last week. The accusations themselves were based on interviews with more than 60 people and a review of internal union records. Fresno State University, located not far from where Chavez helmed the farm workers movement in the 1960s, will remove its campus monument to Chavez, and California State San Marcos said it would cover its 1997 sculpture of the icon. It will also deliberate further actions in the coming days. According to Sacramento's news outlet ABC 10, the California Museum in Sacramento has also said that its Board of Trustees plans to remove Chavez from the California Hall of Fame in a first ever rescinding. Of course, this fallout is affecting many closely held legacies with no obvious path forward. As Hyperallergic explains, Chavez's likeness has for decades embodied the historic mobilization of farm workers against exploitative growers in the 1960s. It's deeply associated with the groundbreaking organization that he co-founded, the United Farm Workers, which means that we will likely see a sort of forced reckoning for institutions across the country who bear his name, more than we already have seen, as well as in the arts, visual culture, and especially the graphic heritage of the Chicano movement. This will undoubtedly be a complex and emotionally fraught process, but in a statement detailing her own accusations against Chavez, co-founder of UFW, Dolores Huerta, stressed that, quote, "The farm worker movement has always been bigger and far more important than any one individual. We must continue to engage and support our community, which needs advocacy and activism now more than ever," end quote, in a reminder for us to not lose hope. Some bad news for my fellow modern glass art enthusiasts. A suspect was arrested last week for $240,000 US worth of damage to Chihuly glass artworks. Seattle Police Department reported that the 40-year-old man, identified in court documents as Alexander Weiss, wreaked catastrophic havoc at the Seattle Center's Chihuly Garden and Glass Museum late last Monday evening. Chihuly's highly popular and often oversized glassworks have made him the preeminent American practitioner of the medium, and his most expensive creations usually sell for around $200,000. The man, Weiss, became aggravated upon being confronted by security who had heard glass breaking outside of normal opening hours, then threw shards of glass at the guards and tried to stab one museum security officer with a broken piece of it. Thankfully, no one was hurt. A spokesperson did not clarify which works were destroyed, but described the suspect's break-in to an outside garden area and damage of a since-removed quote-unquote installation in statements on behalf of the center. Local KOMO News tells us that Weiss is in custody as of the time of their reporting and has now officially been accused of damaging 12 pieces of work, each valued at around $20,000, though investigators have not yet said how the suspect was able to gain access to the center. Looking internationally, Monopol reported that the Berlin Academy of Art has slammed the recent cuts it saw to its art prizes, calling them both a cultural and political misstep, while criticizing, in its Tuesday statements, the fact that Berlin's governing mayor, Kai Wegner, has not responded to 2 letters about the issue. The state currently funds a total of €45,000 for 7 awards, $10,000 for the Grand Art Prize, and $5,000 for each of the 6 other prizes, but the Academy says that these sums are modest, really. And the why we care about it is that this is not any old prize, although it is old, established in 1948 to mark the March Revolution of 1848. As Art News explains it, quote, has always carried a political weight. It's meant to celebrate artistic freedom while promoting democratic self-expression, end quote. And the Academy itself not only reiterated that the funding covers the organizing fees, but that cutting the prize totals in half would, quote-unquote, significantly devalue the awards. It could even threaten the prize's future. And in a delightful surprise last week, a painting in the Vatican's collection was newly identified as an El Greco. Restorers discovered the hidden painting, dated to the 1590s, underneath a forged artwork which had been hanging in the Vatican for decades while performing conservation work on it. The work was donated by Spanish official Jose Maria Sanchez de Munian Gil in 1967 to Pope Paul VI. It hung in the Pope's apartment at the Apostolic Palace until very recently. The small oil painting of a Christ figure titled The Redeemer is now on view in an exhibition of just 2 artworks titled El Greco in the Mirror, 2 paintings in dialogue. We also learned that Art Dubai has postponed its 2026 fair amid Iran war fears. The 20th anniversary edition has been rescheduled to May 14th through 17th of 2026, shifting from its typical mid-April dates. Its organizers say that the change of schedule due to escalating regional conflict does not, however, mean a change of quality. The fair will instead adopt a, quote, more focused, curated, and flexible format, end quote, while remaining at its usual Madinat Jumeirah location, aiming to bring together galleries, artists, and institutions in these troubled times. The event itself and any changes to its schedule is important and notable as it's a quote-unquote lodestar of the region's burgeoning art scene, according to Art Forum. The 2026 iteration was originally set to feature over 100 presentations from more than 35 countries. And of course, the timing of the Israel-Iran-US war is unfortunate given that the Gulf region has very recently become critical to the art market, with Art Basel launching a Qatar edition in February and Frieze launching a rebranded Abu Dhabi fair in November, aside, of course, from all the loss of human life. But it sucks to see this market start to flourish and then get knocked right back down. A neat adjustment, however, that shows creativity in action here. The art newspaper reports that participating dealers will not pay a traditional upfront stand fee, but will instead be charged a percentage of their sales capped at the stand fee equivalent. So there's a little bit of financial flexibility here that is unique. Speaking of art fairs, dozens of Venice Biennale artists have now demanded Israel's exclusion, but the Biennale itself says that no sanctions have been broken. A letter released by the activist group Art Not Genocide Alliance less than 2 months before the opening of the event on March 17th has been signed by nearly 200 artists, curators, and arts workers associated with this year's edition of the fair, including 2 members of the team tasked with realizing the vision of the late curator Koyo Kooa, the curators Gabe Beckhurst Fieho, and Rasha Salti signed. Yet the first thing I noticed about this story during our research is that the letter itself explains that 12 artists and curators from other pavilions signed the letter anonymously, fearing, quote, possible physical, political, or legal harms from signing publicly, end quote. However, the letter reads in part that the undersigned, quote, stand together as artists, curators, and art workers in a collective refusal to allow you to platform the Israeli state as it commits genocide. In 2024, the outrage against the inclusion of a genocidal state in the Art Biennale was so strong that the Israel Pavilion was forced to close. As we reach an appalling anniversary, 2.5 years of open genocide against Palestine, and 77 years after the Nakba, the Israeli state once again seeks the legitimization of the Biennale to masquerade as a creator instead of destroyer of life and culture, end quote. The publication of the letter is important because pressure on the international event and its participants keeps rising year after year, not only within 2026, as the Biennale continues to oppose those protesting the participation of Israel as well as Russia. The collective's 2024 petition to the exhibition's leaders garnered over 24,000 signatures globally and featured many past Biennale participants, although the event and its organizers have stated publicly that it rejects, quote, any form of exclusion or censorship of art and culture, end quote, and insists that when it comes to the fair, Russia hasn't broken any rules. On top of the EU threatening to pull its funding over the Russian pavilion, Italian Culture Minister Alessandro Guili has also urged the organizers to revoke Israel's invitation altogether. Not everyone, however, is on the same side here. Italy's deputy premier and leader of the League Party, Matteo Salvini, defended the pavilion as a means to have the arts bring people together. Yet our sources note that Salvini's comments are perhaps to be taken with a grain of salt, given his past admiration for Russian President Vladimir Putin prior to the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. We also found out that previous Biennale statements weren't entirely true. The letter used the exhibition's earlier political precedents, such as devotion of the event to the liberation of Chile from Pinochet in 1974, in its argument to force Israel's withdrawal this year. Ultimately, the participation of Russia, Israel, Iran, and even the USA amid these ongoing wars has raised serious questions about the Biennale's stated aim of being quote-unquote neutral. In addition to how the Biennale can, quote, develop ethics standards to facilitate such disputes as other international events like the Olympics have long had, end quote, writes Art News senior editor Alex Greenberger. And I'll leave you with a bit of insight into the participating artist perspectives. Carolina Caicedo told Hyperallergic that she feels artists in the Biennale are being, quote, dragged into a position of complicity. For me, making art and showing it in art exhibitions is not a neutral process, end quote. A few announcements and discoveries from the last week. A lost page from the 1,000-year-old Archimedes palimpsest manuscript has made a reappearance. Researcher Victor Geisenberg of the French National Center for Scientific Research at the Musée des Beaux-Arts in France is credited with the discovery, and the cool part about it is prior to the invention of multispectral imaging in the 2000s, historian and philologist Johann Ludwig Heiberg's 1906 photographs were the only way for researchers to access the manuscript. A separate group of researchers confirmed the location of the lost city of Alexandria on the Tigris last week. News of the find in Iraq was actually first announced in January by the University of Constance in Germany, whose chair of Mediterranean and Near Eastern archaeology, Professor Stefan Hauser, led the initiative documenting the site. Researcher John Hansman first made the connection between vestigial structures in an area known as Jebel Khayaber near Basra and a description of Alexandria on the Tigris written in the 1st century CE by Pliny the Elder by reviewing aerial photographs taken in the mid-20th century, but regional instability prevented further research until 2014, and until recently, the team conducted only non-invasive research, including service surveys and drone photography, as difficult working conditions remained. We also learned who the recipients of the one-time $100,000 Rauschenberg Centennial Award were. Each of the winners was chosen from among those who had been invited to attend or participated in the Foundation's Captiva residency in the disciplines of art, photography, performance, and writing. Our winners are Senga Ngudi, David Thompson, Chandra McCormick, and Keith Calhoun, as well as Patricia Spears-Jones. A huge congratulations to the winners. And another shout out to Trevor Paglin, who won the $100,000 LG Guggenheim Award for Art and Technology, becoming the 4th to do so. The artist himself said that the money will go towards supporting the costs of his work, which contends with surveillance technology and AI. The jury wrote of him, quote, "His works consistently bring legibility and public access to opaque and often inaccessible technologies while resisting dominant corporate narratives and foregrounding broader societal, and ethical considerations," end quote. And finally, in this category, the National Women's History Museum announced a 7-figure donation from Meryl Streep. The exact donation amount remains unspecified, but Streep's gift to the nomadic digital-first museum, quote, "reflects her enduring belief in the power of amplifying women's voices," end quote, and will fund storytelling projects as well as digital programming, according to the museum's statements. And we'll close out today with 2, let's call them thinker stories, ones that I want you to sit with and really sort through your feelings about, and also pause the episode after and DM us your takes on. The first one, artists would be quote-unquote wise to be quote-unquote unpolitical, says the founder of an art school that received a $2 million NEH grant last year. In an interview with the New York Times, realist painter and founder of Grand Central Atelier in Queens, Jacob Collins, seemed to suggest that the school's mission to stay out of politics helped it hang on to its $2 million National Endowment of the Humanities grant despite rounds of cuts in January of last year. Collins himself has been an outspoken critic of modernism and avant-garde art. He was also a speaker at September's National Conservatism Conference in D.C., where he argued that American modernism was a quote-unquote error and that European abstraction complicated, quote, the natural American empiricism, end quote, that had existed prior. In that first major interview since the award, Collins made some comments to the New York Times that have caught the questioning attention of the art world. He stated, quote, "To say things aren't politics, that's just not true, but the artist is very wise to be as unpolitical as possible," end quote. More curiously, Collins gave conflicting accounts of how the Atelier received the grant, first claiming that he was approached by Michael McDonald, the agency's acting chairman, then switched to saying that he had reached out to McDonald in August at the suggestion of a mutual acquaintance. All in all, we're finding this fairly suspicious behavior, not getting your own story straight, and we don't necessarily love the suggestion that bowing to Trump administration priorities does in fact literally pay. Yet that seems to be exactly what Collins is recommending. We're wondering about the motivations for his advice to sort of stay silent, stay out of it. That is one thing that the arts are proudly bad at. Our typical sources also reported last week that the media may have unmasked Banksy. We asked, however, will it affect his hype? As many who vaguely or intensely follow the art world know, the mystery of the artist's identity has long been part of the value of his infamously authority-defying art, and now With Reuters apparently tracking down and publicizing his real name, the art world has more questions than answers. Some wondered why the news outlet would even publish his name, as many Banksy fans are mourning the loss of the mystery and lashed out at the news outlet, with one claiming it was like being told that Santa Claus doesn't exist without warning. Others, however, were concerned that even the limited identifying information published could land the artist in hot water, since most of his work has been done on other people's private property. And the biggest question here, will his art retain value without the mystery? Art experts say yes, explaining how Banksy grew out of this tradition of street artists who viewed the undercover secretive act of posting their art in public as a subversive form of expression. These experts argue rather astutely that his murals and their socio-political messages about worldwide injustice will survive because Banksy's appeal wasn't driven solely by his anonymity. It was rather our awe at his ability to erect new street art in the age of CCTV and social media. That was incredible to us. Plus his spectacle and the wit and these settings which reflect the very urban nature of his work. They also say yes because this isn't the first time he's been unmasked per se. The Daily Mail reported compelling evidence that the artist's birth name is Robin Gunningham in a 2008 article, and the Associated Press published confirmation of that fact in 2016, after which point Banksy changed it to the second most popular British guy named David Jones. He was also arrested way back before his fame for defacing a Marc Jacobs billboard atop a building on Hudson Street in New York back in September of 2000. What seems to be the most important thing about that anonymity was that it allowed us to connect with Banksy as a sort of average Joe observer who sometimes made a poignant point, as someone among us, someone who could be anyone. Joe Sire, a Banksy expert and founder of My Art Broker, said, quote, "If anything, Banksy's anonymity has functioned less as a celebrity device and more as a way to keep the work universally accessible, detached from personality, ego, or biography. It allows the work to sit in public space, politically and culturally, without being anchored to an individual in the way the mainstream press often frames it," end quote. And I think he's completely right. But as with every good story, there's a twist. Associated Press points out that, quote, "Along with the sadness, there's ample speculation in the art world and on social media that the artist himself orchestrated this round of naming," end quote. After all, he didn't deny the Reuters story. And as some have observed in the art world, this would be pretty in line with his practice of stunts and satire. As they say, all publicity is good publicity. And that is all I have for you, honeys, this week. Please be assured that we are working on these technological issues to make sure that we can be consistent for you. We will, I swear, hell or high water, be back again with more Beesness, more buzz for you. Until then, stay safe, stay hydrated, enjoy our transition to spring. Finally, it's about time. And we will talk soon. Chris Meinhold created our music, but the episode itself was researched, hosted, fact-checked, edited, produced by yours truly, master's degree holder Celia Bugno.